It's amazing how fast the time goes as we study the Old Testament together. We've gone from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, and now Jacob's family is growing, and we're going to focus on Joseph, his son Joseph, born in the wilderness, his favorite, who gets a coat of many colors for. A little bit of family jealousy going on. Let's get started. Thanks again for joining me with another episode of Papa John's Scripture Notes Project. We really do, our effort is to try to understand the Bible as far as it is translated correctly. If we can, we're going to get back to the original history, language, and context, get past the English language, the English words on the printed page or on the computer screen, and if possible, pierce the veil. Wouldn't it be great to even come to know God instead of just know the Bible, but to actually know the true and living God? That's what Abraham has found a way to do. And his son Isaac, amazing stories we've been focusing on. And then Jacob. And now we're going to focus on Joseph. Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. Now, last episode we talked about the brothers casting him in a pit and selling him off, and we're picking up the story right there. The story moves quickly. Verse 2, and Yehovah was with Joseph. And we're going to use the real name, the restored name. And you might get tired of Papa John talking about the restored name, but when we get to Exodus, you'll begin to understand a little bit more. This is unique to the Old Testament. Someday when we're studying the New Testament together, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and Doctrine and Covenants, you're going to miss how clear it is in the Old Testament once we've seen what the translators did, and how every time we see the Lord, and Lord is all capitals, originally in the original Hebrew version of the Bible, it had the divine name for God himself. So Yehovah was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that Yehovah was with him, and that Yehovah made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had he put into his hand. And it came to pass from that time that he had made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, that Yehovah blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of Yehovah was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. He doesn't even have to think about what's for dinner. He just said, hey, what's on the menu? And verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and said unto him, lie with me. But he refused, and said unto his master's wife, behold, my master wotteth not. Now that's definitely Old English. In Joseph Smith translation, he says knoweth not. Thank you. That's much easier for my English mind. My master knoweth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. So Joseph is even acknowledging that the master's not even keeping track of stuff, but he's trusted me. Verse 9, there is none greater in this house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against Elohim, the divine title instead of the divine name this time? Nehemiah, our Hebrew scholar, says we're told later in Leviticus chapter 18, that the Egyptians were in all kinds of forms of sexual perversion, even to the point where the Pharaoh would often marry his sister. Literally, he's got to marry someone who is a god like him. So it's very possible here that if they would have asked the husband, Potiphar, would have said, yeah, sure, go right ahead. I can't. And why do I say he can't do it? Because he's actually called in Hebrew a suris, a pharaoh suris, which is the eunuch of Pharaoh. it's possible that he really happily would have let Joseph be with his wife. And Joseph is saying, I can't do that. That's a sin against Jehovah. I don't care what your husband says. Now that takes a whole new angle that I never would have thought of without our Hebrew scholar who understands the Hebrew obviously better than we do. All of Christianity, I really believe we've received kind of a whitewashed version of the scriptures, and we're missing so much of the details. We're just getting the surface level of the stories. Now, our Methodist minister, Keith Johnson, responds, so you're telling me that the wife is simply saying, look, my husband is a eunuch? Is that what you're saying here? Nehemiah says, well, that's what it says in verse 1. Joe knows, really? So he's unarmed? So, okay, it doesn't say that in my verse 1, but that's what it says in Hebrew. Is it obvious in Hebrew? He hasn't got the goods? Keith Johnson says, Nehemiah casually like, it's obvious to me. I mean, you should be able to see that. Ask the average person, did you know that his wife had a husband who was a eunuch? And no one knew that, Nehemiah. Now that's a Torah pearl, and you just casually throw that out there? And Nehemiah's response, I really love. He says, I just thought everyone knew that. Back to the story, verse 10, and it came to pass as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. And it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled, and got him out. And it came to pass, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house, and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in a Hebrew, referring to her husband Potiphar. He hath brought in a Hebrew unto us, to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass, when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled, and got him out. Now Jono basically reiterates these verses. He says, it's interesting. It says that day by day she's begging him, come on, let's get it on. But then it so happened that one day none of the men of the house were inside, so she's obviously doing this. It's commonplace. Come on, come on. But this time there's no one there. And he left his garment when she grabs it, and he fled. Now she's got the garment in her hand. She feels rejected, I suppose, and she's thinking, I'm not having any of that. No, 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 sunshine. Now what's happened really was you came in here and you begged for it, and I refused. And when I screamed, you were already half clothed and ran away, and here's your garment. Man, are you in trouble. So she tells it to Potiphar when he returns, and lo and behold, and Nehemiah interrupts Jono. Wait. You just skipped over verse 14. So she said, see, he hath brought to us this Hebrew man. And then I can't pronounce the Hebrew word, but he says it's translated as to mock us. He brought this Hebrew man in to mock us. It's translated, uh, it translates it usually, but that's the same exact word that's described when Ishmael and what he was doing to Isaac when he got kicked out of the house. So here's that same word again. Jono says, really? How about that? There it is again. Nehemiah says, so it really means not to mock us, but to molest us is what it really means. Literally, she's saying, you brought him here and he's molesting me. That's what Keith Johnson, the Methodist minister, says. And Nehemiah says, you're right, exactly. So again, without the Hebrew, we wouldn't really understand some of the details of that story I've heard most of my life. Verse 16, and she laid up his garment by her until her Adonai came home. She spake unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came into me to mock me. And we know that actually meant to molest me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. And it came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, so when Potiphar heard, he's like, was she spake unto him, saying, and so after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. Potiphar is angry at Joseph. Verse 20, and Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. But Jehovah was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. And Joseph Smith helps us with the little more modern English. He was the overseer of it. And we're already at the end of verse 23 is the last verse of chapter 39. And it says, the keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because Jehovah was with him, meaning Joseph. And that which he did, Jehovah made it to prosper. So a second time, he's put in charge of everything. And these guys got easy, they're on easy street, doing their job, but not having to do much. Genesis chapter 40, the story continues. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their Adonai, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. Now, is there a candlestick maker in here? Because it sounds like a fairy tale, butler and baker. But the baker, we can understand, but I learned, and I think they're going to get into this, but my memory serves me right, the butler was actually like the cup bearer. He was responsible for testing anything before the king drank it, just to make sure he wouldn't die if someone was trying to take his life through poisoning. Here's a beautiful piece of art I found that we're going into. So Joseph's in prison, but he's in charge. And both of these men now are about to have dreams. Verse 3, and he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. Now Jonah says, okay, he finds himself in prison. I think this is the first reference to prison in the Torah. We read that the guard, the keeper of the prison, how everything becomes easy and rosy for him while Joseph is in charge of his duties. And so we know what had happened with Potiphar at this stage, but it does look good for the keeper of the prison. And he puts him in charge of the butler and baker, but not the candlestick maker. That's where I got that joke from Jonah. But the king of Egypt, because they're in there, because somehow they offended Pharaoh, now the butler is the cupbearer, right? Oh, and this is where I learned that. So you guys, it's funny what I still remember from years ago. But the point is, what did they do to offend the king or Pharaoh? It probably was coming down to food. Maybe he got sick because of the food and he threw him in prison for fear that they were behind it. Anyway, I'm speculating. Nehemiah responds, cupbearer. What it says in Hebrew, yes, it is cupbearer, and that's one of the most important jobs in an ancient kingdom. The reason is that they didn't have forensic technologies, and so it would be very easy if you wanted to get rid of the king, if you could get the cupbearer and convince him to put poison in the cup. And so he truly is the most trustworthy official in the kingdom. And we see that later in the book of Nehemiah, or we would call Nehemiah. Because Nehemiah is the cupbearer of the Persian king. And that's how he gets permission to go and then rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, because he's the most trustworthy person in the kingdom. It's a very important position, and the baker is obviously important for the same reason. And that story about Nehemiah rebuilding the wall, or Nehemiah, we're going to get to that later. But he's referencing that here. Verse 6, and Joseph came in unto them in the morning and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his Adonai's house, saying, wherefore look ye so sadly today? Now, Adonais is plural for Adonai, which is basically, these are both words for Lord or lords in the Hebrew. Verse 8, and they said unto him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpretation of it. And Joseph said unto them, do not interpretations belong to Elohim? Tell me them, I pray you. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph. And remember, this is the cupbearer. And he said unto him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup unto Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place. And thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner, when thou wast his butler. But think on me. And this is where he's saying, hey, this is important. Verse 14 is important because he's hoping he'll say something to the Pharaoh about his plight. Joseph is stuck in prison, right? He says, But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of the house. Nehemiah is going to help explain verse 14. So the word here, there's actually 2 words here in verse 14, and they're Zechar, and Hiskar, or Zechar Tani, and Hiskar Tani. Oh my goodness. And one of them is, You will remember me, and the other one is, You will mention me. But both of them are from the root of Zayin Kafresh Zakar. Oh my, you guys. Papa John is going to learn this someday. I'll continue. And the word that appeared in Exodus is Zayin, which is from the same root. Now, Zayin is my Zekar, or it rhymes with baker, so Zekar, which is a noun, and Zekar Tani and Hezkar Tani are verbs. But the word Zekar Tani could legitimately also mean you will mention me, as opposed to you will remember me. So he's saying, reading this in Hebrew, we get the concept that he's not just saying remember his name, but rather mention me by name to Pharaoh when it goes well for you. Okay, very detailed interpretation with the help of Nehemiah for verse 14. Moving on, verse 15. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon. But it should be the word pit, and I think that's what he describes next. Can I point something out in verse 15 before we end? Nehemiah says. So he says literally in Hebrew, for I have surely I have surely been stolen from the land of the Hebrews, and also here, I didn't do anything, for they have placed me in the pit. That's what it literally says in Hebrew. And what I love about a lot of Bible stories that are very often use this principle of something having a double meaning, and it's on purpose. And here there's definitely a double meaning. They put me in the pit. Well, what pit is he talking about? The pit could refer to the dungeon he's currently in, the prison he's in, because the word from Hebrew, in Hebrew, is bor, meaning pit. But if you could also say the pit that my brothers threw me in, meaning you can read it, for I was stolen from the land of the Hebrews, for they put me in a pit. And also here, I didn't do anything. And I actually think he means both of those. I think there's an intention there to be ambiguous. I really wished I'd been raised, or I wished I'd taken the time in my youth to learn more languages, especially Hebrew. And I'm not sure at this age how much I'm going to learn, the old dog, new tricks type thing. Verse 16, when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was all manner of baked meat for Pharaoh. And the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off of thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. Oh, wow. And it came to pass the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants. So he hasn't made a feast. He's declared a feast, right? And he's lifted up his head. He lifted up the head of the chief butler and the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, which would mean the cup holder again. And he gave, in fact, that's what it says next. And he gave the cup into the Pharaoh's hand. Verse 22, but he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. So he doesn't mention Joseph. So Nehemiah explains, oh, wow, and we're already done with chapter 40. Verse 23 says, Velo. Now, Zekar, ki ker, rhymes with baker, could be either he remembered, or it could be also he mentioned. So he's continuing from the previous verse 14, the same lesson. So you could legitimately translate it, the chief cupbearer didn't mention Joseph, or the chief cupbearer didn't remember Joseph. Really, they're the same thing, but in Hebrew, the failure to mention, the failure to remember, both of those are the opposite of to forget, meaning it's forgetting to bring it up in your mind versus forgetting to bring it up in your mouth. And really, what was important here wasn't that it was in his mind, in his head. He might actually have remembered, obviously, his dream being interpreted by Joseph, but he did not mention him, and he didn't bother to mention him to Pharaoh. All right, chapter 41. We're getting into Pharaoh's dream next. But right here, just to explain this word, mi kits in Hebrew, and that means meaning at the end of. And so this is the phrase that begins the 10th Torah portion of the parashah. Now, what's the parashah? Well, long before the Come Follow Me curriculum from the Latter-day Saint Church that we've been doing for the last few years, where we have an annual curriculum that we follow and all try to follow together. The parashah is the annual reading of the Torah for the Hebrews. And so this is the beginning of the 10th Torah portion for the parashah. And this signifying the conclusion of Joseph's 2-year imprisonment. It marks a turning point where a period of waiting ends and a new era of fulfillment begins. I have had those type of things happen in my life, and I'm grateful for those. It continues. In context, it initiates the story of Pharaoh's dream, Joseph's rise to power, and his reunion with his brothers. It highlights God's timing, often signifying a shift from hardship to relief or the fulfillment of divine promises. This portion of the parashah's annual reading frequently coincides with Hanukkah, emphasizing themes of light after darkness and the end of unnatural circumstances. That's beautiful. I hope I can retain some of that information. So here we have images of Pharaoh in bed, dreaming of cows and of corn. Verse 1, and it came to pass at the end of the 2 full years. So poor Joseph has been in prison 2 years now. At the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. Now, kine is cows. A few episodes ago, we were talking about cattle, and they were told that just means livestock. But in this case, kine is cows. All right. And verse 3, and behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-fated and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. Now Nehemiah helps us understand kine rhymes with time, and kine are cows. The word gaunt in Hebrew is dekat, rhymes with sak, and literally means thin. So the next part of the dream, he continues, and he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears and blasted with the east wind sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 ranks and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for the magicians of Egypt, and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Nehemiah, again, our Hebrew scholar, says, now this is a very interesting story because it's almost identical to Daniel chapter 2, where Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He also calls the magicians to interpret the dream, and the only one who can interpret it in the end and offers satisfactory interpretation is Daniel. It's a very similar story. And we'll get to that when we get to the book of Daniel. Verse 9, and then spake the chief butler, but we actually know he wasn't the butler, he was the cupbearer. The chief cupbearer unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Finally, right? Pharaoh was wroth with me, servants. So he's reminiscing. Remember, you were wroth with his servants, including me, and put me in the ward, in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. And we dreamed a dream in one night, and I and he, we dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams, to each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine house, or mine office, and him he hanged. Verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself, and changed his raiment, and came unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it, and I have heard say of thee that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. Canst. Don't you love that old English, King James? But Hebrew does have that double negative sometimes, so maybe that's bleeding through the King James English. 16, and Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not in me. Elohim shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Nehemiah explains, it literally says God will answer the peace of Pharaoh. What does that mean exactly? That seems kind of ambiguous. I think what it means in this context that we're going to have peace in that you're going to have an answer. The answer might not be something that you like, but you'll have peace in that what is plaguing you and not knowing the answer will be satisfied. You'll be satisfied. Now, our Methodist Keith says, now I think it's interesting that in coming from this different situation where he's in prison unjustly, and he comes out, and the first thing he says to Pharaoh is, Elohim will do it. And Nehemiah agrees. It is really interesting because in the Hebrew way, it literally says, Elohim, he will answer. So the beautiful thing they're pointing out is he's not bitter. He still honors God. In fact, that's the first thing he does, is to honor God as he speaks to Pharaoh. 17, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. This is starting to be repetitive, isn't it? And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored, and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine. And when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. They're still skinny, right? And then it says, so I awoke. And I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted, with the east wind sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears, and I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. And Joseph says unto Pharaoh, the dream of Pharaoh is one. Elohim hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 good kine are 7 years, and 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What Elohim is about to do, he showed unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine, following for it be very grievous. For that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice, it is because the thing is established by Elohim, and Elohim will shortly bring it to pass. Now Jonah asked the question, verse 32, and the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. What have you got, Nehemiah? He says, yes, the doubling of the dream of Pharaoh twice is because the matter is established, or on a foundation from God, and God will quickly do it. It happened twice, once for heaven and once for earth, 2 witnesses. And that's interesting. In light of the restored gospel, I see a little commonality there from the Hebrew understanding. Verse 33, now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through famine. And eventually when we get to Exodus, I believe I have actual pictures of the step pyramids that they believe Joseph helped design to store the grain within. That's pretty cool. Back to this story, verse 37. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom the spirit of Elohim is? Nehemiah says, in the pagan mentality, and Pharaoh was a pagan, and in their mentality they have no problem recognizing the God of the Hebrews as being a true God. They just have lots of gods. They'll accept the Hebrew God, the Christian God, the Muslim God, the gods of the world, even the Hindu gods. They would recognize all those gods, lowercase gods, but they would just say, well, we're going to continue to worship Ra, our sun god, because he's our God, but you go worship your God. So I don't think he had a problem recognizing the reality and the truth of the God of Israel, or in this case, the God of the Hebrews, Jehovah. He just saw him as one of many. That is the bondage, and that was the bondage that Pharaoh was in. I love the fact that our Hebrew scholar is saying Pharaoh is in bondage, especially coming from his Jewish, he's a long line of Jewish rabbis, and they were, I think it's 200 years, many generations, they were in bondage to Pharaoh, and yet they're looking at him as the one in bondage because he doesn't know the true and living God. That's powerful. Verse 39, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, forasmuch as Elohim hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Jonah says, after this confirmation that he received, it was clear to him that Joseph is the spirit of Elohim. And so he ends up taking the signet ring off his hand and puts it on Joseph's hand, and he clothes his garments in the garments of fine linen and puts a gold chain around his neck, and he has him ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried out before him, bow the knee. And so we start to see here in these few verses the fulfilling of Joseph's dream. Nehemiah adds, in the Hebrew, if you translate this very literally, it says, you will be over my house, and on your mouth will all my people kiss. This may be some form of honor, like how the Godfather, when they kiss his ring. So this might be some kind of thing like that, where they would actually kiss him on the mouth as a form of saying, you're the boss. It's difficult to translate that literally because we don't have that cultural reference, but that's what it says literally in the Hebrew. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, see, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Jonah adds that Pharaoh took his signet ring off. He repeats that, the chariots, and bowed the knee. So we start to see here, obviously, again, the fulfillment of Joseph's dream. Nehemiah adds, and Pharaoh called Joseph Tafhanat Paneah. Presumably that's an Egyptian name. It may also have a meaning in Hebrew. If we take it by a Hebrew name, Tafhanat would be from the word Zophen, which is a code. And Paneah would be to decipher a code decipherer. So that's interesting here that the name has meaning in Hebrew, even though it's very clearly not a Hebrew name, it's an Egyptian name. This is actually a pattern we see throughout history. When the Israelites are in exile, and that's what we still consider the diaspora, the dispersion, the scattering of Israel, is what we'd say in the Latter-day Saint Church. Israel's been scattered. So in their exile, when they're in foreign lands, they're given these positions of power, quite common throughout history. And there's also given foreign names, the names of their captors. For example, Daniel is called Belshazzar, and I never knew that. I always wondered why we knew the Hebrew names for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but I just always thought Daniel was Daniel in Hebrew. Well, he is, I'm sorry, but like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, see, I've already forgotten their Hebrew names, but this is news to me, or I'd forgotten it. Daniel in Babylon is Belshazzar. Why is he called Belshazzar? Nehemiah asks. And then he answers, because it says that means after the name of the king's god, the god Bel, which is a form of Baal. So Daniel is actually given an exilic name after the name Baal. Like we see Mordecai, who's the character in the book of Esther. Well, Mordecai is from the Babylonian god Marduk. So that was his Babylonian name. His captors gave him that name. What was his real name? His Hebrew name? We don't actually know. Now we know that Hadassah was renamed Esther in Babylon. And Esther is after Ishtar, the goddess of Easter, the fertility goddess. We see this pattern. Actually, this was something I was hesitating if I should mention, which is that there's something in the history of my people, the Jews, which really even transcends, it goes beyond the Bible. And I call it the Kissinger syndrome. And this is interesting. And I remember Henry Kissinger. When I was a boy, he was a Secretary of State. But let me just read from Nehemiah. Henry Kissinger was the American Secretary of State, and he was a Jew who hates other Jews. And he did horrible damage to Israel. But he was a Jew who was second in command. As a Jew, he could never be in charge. He could only ever be second in command to Richard Nixon, the President of the United States. And we see this with Joseph here in Egypt. As the Hebrew, he can never be in charge. He can only be number two. He's actually running the show because he's smarter than everyone else, but he's only ever number two. We see that with Mordecai in the book of Esther. We see it with Daniel in the book of Daniel. We see that actually with Nehemiah, whom I'm named after. Nehemiah, or Nehemiah, he was the cupbearer of the king, the Persian king. And he could never be the Persian king because he's a Hebrew. But he could be in charge of some responsibilities. And actually, he's carrying the king in some respects, but he's only ever number two. There seems to be this pattern in the exile. And maybe this has to do with what we saw here with Joseph. God blesses the people of Israel with certain skills and abilities, but because they're in exile, because of that situation, they're never number one. Always the man behind the scene. And here's some notes from Papa John. Because of what Nehemiah just shared with us, this is what I added in the footnotes. This concept is consistent with Joseph as being a prophetic shadow picture and a type of Jesus. Both go from the pit to the palace, so to speak. What does Papa John mean by that? Both come from the loins of Judah. Both are beloved sons. Both are rejected by their brothers. Both are seen descending and suffering. Both in time are exiled, and both end up saving all who come to them. And that's after their ascension. That's interesting. And even as Nehemiah points out here regarding the Kissinger syndrome, both Joseph and Jesus rise no higher than second in command. And Joseph is such a powerful shadow picture of good things to come. It's beyond remarkable. Wow, are we paying attention? We truly do love and serve a great God, don't we? That's one of my favorite sayings in my Papa John's efforts. I'm in awe of the God we love and serve. Let me continue with what I wrote here. My humble and constant prayer is always, may I too trust God in waiting. May I too learn to forgive deeply. May I too serve faithfully and in all honesty. Ever since I've surrendered to He who is mighty to save, it's not so difficult. You guys, I delight in Him and His ways and His promises. I've discovered His yoke is easy and His burden is light, just as He said in Matthew chapter 11. Now, Keith, our Methodist minister, says the thing that's interesting about this, we saw Joseph, the code breaker, is given Azanath, daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. Well, wait a minute. So the daughter of the priest is given to Joseph, and that's going to be the mother of his sons? So, God, what are you doing? From my Methodist mind, Keith is saying, why are you doing it this way? And later you'll talk about the significance of his son, but the root of it isn't just that Pharaoh says like something like, listen, Joseph, you're just amazing. Continued to be in your Hebrew culture. In fact, go back to Israel, get yourself a wife, and bring her back, and you can be in charge as a Hebrew. No, he's trying to make him as Egyptian as he can be. So what do? They give him a wife and change his name, but in his heart and in his soul, we, as the reader, know he's still Joseph the Hebrew. Whether they want to say it or not, the bottom line is this is God's man in this situation. Though they can fix him up and change him and put makeup on him, uh, and behind all that, though, is God. It's interesting that that's what they're trying to do to get him to be as Egyptian as they can make him look, because they can't really say, this is Joseph the Hebrew to all the people. It's got to be Joseph. No, they can't even use his name, Joseph. We have to call him by another name. We're going to call him the code breaker. That's why he's in charge. Belshazzar. Interesting. Jono from Australia, our Messianic believer, says the other thing that I'd like to point out is the priest of On. The word priest in Hebrew is Cohen. A Cohen is a priest. So it's an interesting thing. If I remember correctly, I think this is the second time it's mentioned in the Tanakh. We have Melchizedek. That he's the first time we heard that word Cohen. This is the second time it's mentioned. And coming from the tradition that I'm from, I find this interesting because where I come from, there were only two kinds of priests. And there was the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, and there was the priesthood after the order of Aaron. There were no other priests, and there were no other applications for the word Cohen. So I just thought I'd throw that in the mix because here's one that's outside both of those concepts. And I remember being stuck on that a little bit. And as I'm learning the word Cohen, Nehemiah is just going to help us all. He says, we don't know that this is a good priest or a good Cohen or an evil Cohen. We really don't know. We don't have the answer to that. If he's a good priest or a bad priest, later on we see references to priests, certainly run-of-the-mill Egyptian Kohanim or priest, plural. Kohanim is plural for priest. And there's obviously priests in their pagan deities. So these Egyptian priests are priests, but they follow pagan deities, not the true God. So the word Cohen by itself doesn't necessarily imply a true priest. You could have a false priest, and he could be called a Cohen. And he says, and Jeroboam sets that up. That's where we set up the high places, and specifically that were not descended from Aaron, or we'd say Aaron. The people of Israel were rebuked for having those non-Aaronic priests. Anyway, so if we see the word Cohen in Hebrew, that doesn't automatically mean they're a believer in the true and living God. That's good to know. Verse 46, and Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Jonah says, verse 13, he was 13 years old when he had his dream, 17 when he was sold by his brothers, and now he's 30. So it's been 13 years. 13 years later, 13 years of slavery and prison, and yet he never lost his faith. That is impressive. And it is. And he's such a good shadow picture for Jesus Christ. Joseph, the parallels in their life, he definitely points to the future Messiah just by the story of his life going down below so much and overcoming so much, and then saving them from death by all those that came to Egypt for food. And we'll get to that soon. Verse 47, and in the 7 plenteous years, the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field which was round about every city laid he up in the same. And Joseph gathered corn as the sand of the sea, very much until he left numbering, for it was without number. So he couldn't even keep track of how much. That's pretty cool. That's similar to the posterity promised Abraham, right? And unto Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of the famine came, which Aseneth, the daughter of Potiphar, I can't read it. Anyway, Potiphar, priest of On, bare unto him. So verse 51, his sons, Manasseh, and he was named Manasseh because God has caused me to forget my toil and the entire house of my father. So Nehemiah is helping us know the root word of Manasseh. So he's been cut off from his father's house. He's a foreigner in a strange land. He is thrown into this situation of slavery and prison. This has impacted it has so impacting on him that he names his firstborn son after this experience, after overcoming this experience. That's impressive. And Jonah says it is because it also highlights the fact that he had toiled. He had painful memories. He had, I suppose, anguished about what had happened to him and where he is at the moment for many years. But in all of that, he never gave up on God. But as you say, in the naming of his first son, he says, because God has made me forget all my toil, and now I'm over it now. And the name of the second son he called Ephraim, for Elohim hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. We always say Ephraim, but I've found here working at the ranch, when we get Jewish people from the East Coast that come out to the ranch, if I said Ephraim, they kind of smile. If I say Ephraim, they understand, and that's more proper, just in case you were interested. In fact, one time, you guys, I told a couple, a very Orthodox couple that came kayaking at the ranch, and I said a few words in Hebrew. They thought that was interesting, and I said, I know you're from the tribe of Judah, and I'm a cousin. I'm from the tribe of Ephraim. And they looked at me kind of odd, kind of surprised. I'm sure they've never heard that before. And after they got done with their kayaking trip, as the shuttle van brought them back by, I was out there working on the upper lawn, and I saw them, and they waved at me first, big waves, and I waved back. Kind of cool, kind of a cool connection. We all are related if we just think about it. I find it important to treat people, even I pass in a store or on the street, with at least a glance, and if our eyes meet, a nod, just to acknowledge each other's humanity. I don't know. I guess Papa John definitely is old school. So the second son is Ephraim, for Elohim hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And that's funny. And Nehemiah explains the word Ephraim. So the name is Ephraim. He made me fruitful. All those words in English, he made me fruitful, are one word in Hebrew, Hyphruni. And so it's a word that sounds like the name Ephraim. Hyphruni. Hyphruni. Verse 54, and the 7 years of plenteous that was in the land of Egypt were ended, and the 7 years of dearth began to come, according as Joseph had said. And the dearth was in all lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold unto the Egyptians. Now, this is interesting. I'm picking up on an insight. Verse 54 says, when the citizens of Egypt ran out of bread, Pharaoh sends them to Joseph, do whatever he says, and he's now selling to the Egyptians. And I remember listening to a scholar say, this is how Egypt became so wealthy, especially from the foreign nations, but even their own people, because they didn't just give them food, they sold it to them. And I guess in a way they had prepared for it with God's help. And the verse ends, and the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all the countries came into Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the lands. Wow, we've covered a lot of territory. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I always do. Let's wrap this up and look forward to more stories in Egypt with Joseph, as he's going to meet his brothers again soon. And until then, I would just tell my children and my grandchildren, extended family, friends that we've met along the way, just continue to be kind, serve others, live the gospel the best you can, find ways to delight into it. It's not a burden. Love God, and I'll talk to you again soon.